Reckless 2.0. Here with Vickiss and D-Train. Are you there?
Good evening. I'm Baragani, everybody.
Greetings. How are you doing, sir?
I'm making it. Still on the plantation, of course.
Same here. Oh, yeah.
All right. We have a very special guest tonight. He wrote an article. He wrote two articles. We're going to discuss two articles today. One is about racism in the publishing industry, and one is about gentrification. You can find these articles. One is on salon.com, and it's called Gentrification's Insidious Violence, The Truth About American Cities. The other is on BuzzFeed.com. It is called Diversity is Not Enough, Race, Power, and Publishing. And without further ado, I guess this guy is very distinguished. He is a former paramedic, as well as a bass player, composer, author, and activist from Brooklyn, New York. Without further ado, our guest is Mr. Daniel Jose Oder. And, sir, please correct me if I said your last name incorrect.
You said it wrong, but I like your version, so we can go with that if you want. That was pretty. I enjoyed that. You threw an extra accent in there somewhere.
He was trying.
But listen, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you for coming. Can you pronounce your last name?
Oh, yeah, it's Older. Regular old.
It's just Older? Oh, okay.
Yep. I know, it's kind of boring.
Talk about overthinking.
He said, "Oh, damn."
I'm sorry, sir.
Not at all. I enjoyed it, like I said.
But how's it going tonight?
I'm very well. Spring is sort of here in Brooklyn, and so I'm happy. Anytime I can go outside and not be bundled up with a billion different layers. I just had a sweater on earlier, so I'm not mad.
Yeah.
How y'all doing over there?
I'm doing pretty well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, liking this good weather. I guess before we get started, if there's anything you wanted to tell listening audience about yourself, then feel free.
My main, what I really do is I'm a science fiction writer. So it's funny because I've been more known recently because of the nonfiction stuff that I've been doing, the essays I've been putting up. I have one book out that's called Salsa Nocturna. It's a collection of short ghost stories about New York City. I guess you could call it urban fantasy. It's kind of a noir style. And I co-edited an anthology of speculative fiction from the margins of history, which comes out very soon. It comes out on May 10th, so it's coming up. May 9th, rather. Mainly what I do is work in the realm of imagination. My first novel is coming out in January, and that's more urban fantasy. But in the course of that, when I'm writing all these, made-up stories, I get angry. I start, are we allowed to swear on this?
Hell yeah.
Oh, good. All right. Well, some shit pissing me off, and then I write an angry essay. I rant about it on Twitter, and then I throw it onto an essay, and then that's what happens. But yeah, the main thrust of my work is actually fantasy.
Awesome. And you can check out the preview. There's a website for the anthology. It's at longhidden.com. Correct?
Longhidden.com. And my website is ghoststar.net, where there's fiction posted and different things that you can read about me, as well as some music, too, from the band.
Awesome. Versatility. I dig that. So I guess as we get started with the program, this program, as I told you, is pretty much exclusively focused on racism. And we define on this program racism and white supremacy as being synonymous. And our definition is as follows. A global system of people who classify themselves as white, who dominate, mistreat, and subjugate people who they classify as not white. Do you agree that such a system exists? And
yeah,
if not,
absolutely.
what is your definition?
No,
Okay.
I think that's what we have to go with, and the important part of that definition is the power dynamic that's inherent to it. And I think what we often tend to do with racism is talk about it and not talk about power, and that's what allows people to kind of like say things like reverse racist and bullshit like that, or basically cry about stuff that has nothing to do with actual racism or power, but is really more about their feelings getting hurt because they're white and they're being called out on their privilege, which is very different. So then they try to act like there's some kind of an equal playing field because their feelings are hurt versus, in comparison to systemic racism and abuse of power and oppression. And there's like an obvious imbalance to anyone who's experienced racism, but somehow the public discourse tries to make those two things on par, and I think that's where we run into problems. So I'm glad you started out with a definition, because we need to be defining things very clearly. Otherwise, those words will get taken away and used by people that are trying to destroy us.
Absolutely. Definitions.
Word. That's it. Yeah.
And for the record, Mr. Oder, you are a non-white male, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm Latino. I'm mixed race, so I'm half white and half Latino, and yeah. So I think there's a lot of places to explore that. And one of the things I tried to be clear about and open about in the gentrification article specifically is what that power dynamic also does within communities of color. So, how white supremacy will divide us within ourselves, how we'll play into those power games, different levels of privilege amongst people of color. So me being a man of color but not black gives me privilege in ways, especially in the gentrification dynamic, but really in every level, in ways that people, or that we're not always like having the conversation on that level, and we have to be. You know what I mean? Like for us to be talking about any kind of social topic, we always have to be doing it with a consciousness of where we fit into it. On the one level for just basic honesty, and on the other level because that's how we go deeper into it, and that's how we move forward. So, in recognition of that, that's where I enter into this topic. Understanding that my life is not, my experience in America is not that of a white person, and it's not that of a black person. And where does that put me on the spectrum, and how does that define my struggle and my analysis and my critique and my privilege, and where does that allow me to, lift up my voice when I need to and be clear about where that places me when I need to. So much of it is about clarity,
Okay, for sure. Yeah, that color hierarchy in America is kind of sucks. I guess I would ask you, your non-white parent, of what descent are they? I guess like national descent.
Of what percent? What percent black are they?
No, of what descent? Like what nationality?
Oh, my mom is
Dominican.
Cuban. My mom is Cuban. Yeah.
Oh, is she Afro-Cuban?
She's not Afro-Cuban, no.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool.
Cuba,
I was just curious.
No, it's a good question. It's an important question, and it's so interesting. Like I was actually in Cuba recently, and when I go to Cuba, I'm a white Cuban. When I'm in America, I'm not a white male. And there's levels to it. And then in Cuba, even there's so many, like here, there's different colors and there's different spectrums along that color line. And then the indigenous aspect is the part we always have to have within this conversation too, because it's often erased in the way that we speak even. It's all there. It's all important to talk about.
That is interesting. I mean, the reason I say that is because you said that you would be classified as white in Cuba, and that just like goes to like the folly of all of these racial classifications. They seem ridiculous.
Exactly. Exactly. When I was there, actually, I was talking to a friend of mine who's Dominican, who grew up in the Bronx, considering herself Afro-Dominican. I mean, she literally identified herself as Afro-Dominican for her entire life. And, I mean, she's like, I don't know, color-wise, she's darker than me. She definitely wouldn't pass for white in any way. But, again, she goes to Cuba, and she's considered white in Cuba. And it blew her mind. And it completely, it's a really profound, I mean, I think a lot, there's so much history of people, especially people of color, going to other countries and having this whole other racial experience. Because, like you said, it's such a ludicrous system, and it's just, the fact that it changes from place to place, but that America still exports white supremacy with such, intensity, it just affects everything. So, yeah, it's a mind fuck,
That's a good word for it. I mean, and I didn't want to get derailed from our agenda or anything, but
no, this is part of it.
This is really interesting to me because, man, like I know that there's disagreement on the percentage of Black Afro-Cubans in Cuba. Like some estimates have it around 30%, some have it around 80%, just depending on who you ask.
Well,
so that's interesting.
The reason that I think it's confused is because that definition is very amorphous. It isn't. You know what I mean? I mean, first of all, are you asking the people themselves? Because I know a lot of Puerto Ricans on the census identified just as white, just purely white, like we're white, like the majority of Puerto Rico, from what I heard. I don't have the numbers in front of me. But so when you're asking people to self-identify in a racist system, which Cuba is, by the way, deeply racist, and you can't really use those answers with any kind of like scientific what do those answers mean? They just mean that people want to identify as white. It has nothing to do with what people are or aren't, what that means. The culture of Cuba is deeply there's a lot of African influence in the culture. But at the same time, like I said, that doesn't mean there's no racism. The racism is deep. It's everywhere. It's institutionalized, and it's also interpersonal. So you have all these layers. I know I keep saying that, but it's like the endless onion that you're just unpeeling, and you're so deep in it, and it's like, whew. And I say it about Cuba because, not to harp on it, but because sometimes here, especially on the left, we get caught up trying to imagine Cuba as a paradise that's post-racial, and I just really want to stress that that's not true. And it's heartbreaking that it's not true because you want it to be true so badly, but it's not.
Fascinating.
Jeez. I mean, there's nowhere you can go to get away from it. Really.
No way.
And you actually, because that's what I was about to ask. What were your impressions on racism in Cuba? And you answered it before I could even ask you, especially given the fact that a lot of Black revolutionaries have ran off to Cuba. Like, I really wanted perspective on that. So,
we can definitely go into that at some point too, in deeper. I was there for 10 days, and then back a bunch of years back, I was there for 3 months. But anyway, let me know if you want to talk deeper into that.
Okay, well maybe that might be a whole nother program.
Absolutely.
It's a long conversation, I'll tell you that.
All right, that was interesting and very unexpected part of the conversation, but that was very interesting and very helpful, and I definitely thank you for that.
Well, yeah,
so I guess we can transition.
But yeah, go ahead.
I guess we can transition into, the article that I read that got me interested in checking out your website and everything, and that is the one about gentrification on salon.com. Vic, did you have any questions before we move on?
Well, I that certainly the article, and I actually read also the diversity is not enough, which I think that, of course we have to get to because it's, wow. But I just also was, also would like to say I was thrown for, not of a loop, but I definitely, I guess it was just interesting hearing about your experience in Cuba, and certainly later on want to hear about how you experienced whiteness in Cuba. The gentrification article, I just it's just the title alone, gentrification's insidious violence. I guess what prompted you to write this article, and I know that the word violence is certainly is very poignant throughout the article and in the headline. And I guess would you like to explain how gentrification is violence?
Yeah. Well, a lot of this is true for most of the articles I write. A lot of it is in response to the dominant conversation about a topic being very tepid and not getting deep enough to the core of the situation. There's no question that when you force people to move out of their homes, that is an act of violence. I think if we understand it that way, if we phrase it that way, that's not really up for debate. When people are forced to leave, that's a violent thing. When they're forced to leave and then you add into it the additional violence of destroying a community, in the sense of you're not just physically displacing people, but you're actually scattering this living kind of undefinable, powerful force in people's lives, especially, like I say in the article, for people who've been marginalized by the United States. The community itself is a fundamental pillar of survival. It's not just like a cute thing with a message board or somewhere to hang out. It's much deeper than that. This is how we survive, is through community. This is how we've survived since there's been a United States of America, and before that too, of course. But in terms of specifically surviving and resistance, community is essential. So when you add that into it, I think, and then when you add in the historical level and the aspect of the institutionalized nature of gentrification, that is, that it's not just a natural phenomenon, which I think sometimes it sounds like the way people describe it. It's like people will talk about it like, oh, that's just something that happened. Oh, well, there's some white people in the neighborhood. Oh, look, a bakery, like la-di-da. But there's actually a plan in place, and not in the sense of a huge conspiracy, but in the sense of the same plan that we've been seeing throughout United States history, which is white supremacy taking things over strategically, often for capitalist impulses, but take your pick. So when you put those elements of it together, I think there's no real there's no debate that it's an act of violence, but that becomes obscured because of the way that we have the conversation. So the conversation ends up being, well, sometimes, there's good things that come out of it, and sometimes there's bad things that come out of it, and let's weigh them out. And, really the same conversation that we were having earlier just about race in general. Like, let's just weigh these two things next to each other and see what comes out, and then have a little cute debate about it. It's not a cute debate. It's really about people's lives being destroyed. And just the act of making it into a cute little, debate is deeply problematic. That's part of the erasure. And like I say in the piece, the central act of violence is one of erasure. It's people's lives not mattering enough to be taken care of. So they're not being treated as full human beings or citizens. They're disposable, and they're sent somewhere else so that they can move out of the way, once people are done gawking at them. And, again, basically to summarize, it's like, I think when you phrase it that way, and I don't think there's anything I've said that isn't true about gentrification. Are there good things? Of course. Do people like bakeries? Absolutely. Doesn't matter. No one cares. That doesn't make it somehow okay. Like, oh, we got a bakery. Well, that makes it all right. Well, then we can displace, an entire historical nation. That's all right. Take out Harlem because now there's a bakery. I just don't understand how that conversation comes out. But it is. People seriously say that, and then you're sitting there like, what? Really? Is that okay? And I'm sorry if I'm rambling.
Oh no!
Okay, good.
There's nothing you've said that has I disagree with.
Okay. The last thing I just wanted to say was that piece in the New York magazine that I referenced, that I kind of tear apart in the essay. That was like the final impulse. I had this essay in my head for maybe like more than a year or something, probably more than that, maybe a couple of years. And I just hadn't sat down to write it. And I was, because like I said, I'm trying to be here writing my fantasy novels. And then I read that piece, and I was so irritated. Irritated isn't even the word. I was pissed off because I found it to be so, like, really, literally, bone-chillingly inhumane in its approach to that conversation, and also just blatantly incorrect. Because his whole premise is sort of like, well, people are always down on gentrification, and I'm like, what possible source of news are you listening to that I'm not, that people are down on gentrification? Because every time I turn on NPR, which is supposed to be like the liberal, like the liberal media, they're just talking about how great it is or how it's kind of okay or whatever. I just didn't, it was such a break from my understanding of everything that I really had to write the piece in part just in response to that.
Racism is not a cute debate. I certainly agree with that, and I do think it's you said that it's not a conspiracy, but it is. What I do think that it is people conspiring, white people conspiring with each other to do this, to build community, to move. So in a way that I do view it as a conspiracy. It's just not a conspiracy theory. It's true, and I do see it as a pattern, even on a large scale with just with the so-called United States. Let's get these Indians out of here, and set up shop. So absolutely.
Yeah, I hear you. Mm-hmm.
I think what people don't realize, though, or that people refuse to acknowledge, is that this has happened before. This whole gentrification thing, when after World War II in the 50s, where the rural outlying areas were underdeveloped, and they built stuff and built restaurants and built highways out there and built interstates, and basically kicked people off of their land. And move these white people out there. So this has happened before. This isn't new. But
before that, there were these neighborhoods in Brooklyn, including Weeksville, which is more famous, and Crow Hill. There was one called Pigstown. There were like these little pockets in central Brooklyn where black folks and people of color in general would escape to after the race riots that happened. Riots is not even the right word, but a lot of them were almost massacres. But there was all this racial unrest around the Civil War. They were called the draft riots. And folks of color were leaving Manhattan in droves because of white supremacy, white supremacist violence, and escaping to Brooklyn and creating these autonomous communities of color, which we barely hear about now, except because the Weeksville Preservation Society does really good work on that. And they found one of the buildings and did some excavation. But those areas also were gentrified, and there was a historic aspect to that in that they were places where people would go to be safe from white supremacy in the sense of literal violence that were then gentrified in the sense of, more long-term violence. And there's the cycle for you, continuous.
Yeah, it just seems, the cyclical nature it just seems like everything, it's almost like fashions, like in the, like everything just seems to come back in style. Because, just based off of what you said, this would be the third time this has happened in the last 150 years. So
Right. And that's why I closed the piece with that Macklemore quote. Negatively. I'm obviously not quoting Macklemore with any sense of respect, but for him to act surprised about that win on was that Grammy night? Yeah, it was Grammy night. He said he just didn't see it coming, and he couldn't believe that it had happened, and he thought it was what did he say, weird and whack or whatever, that he robbed him. And it's like, we don't need allies that don't even have the basic understanding that this shit is predictable. That's not helpful. It doesn't matter if you feel weird about it. If you didn't see it coming, you're not awake and you're not helping. Like it's like in any institution, every person of color in that institution knows that there's going to be some racist bullshit every semester. Some shit is going to go down because it always has and always will. So you'll have like teenagers in a high school that's predominantly white, and all the kids of color in there are just waiting for the next bullshit to pop off. And then it does, and all these middle-aged folks that are supposed to be running things and in charge of student safety are totally caught off guard. And they're like, oh, my God, I cannot believe that this horrible thing could happen in our sacred institution. And everyone else is like, motherfucker, we know this shit was going to happen because it happens every year. Why are you surprised? And that's where I'm like, we have to stop being surprised. Like, we as people of color, white folks as white folks, there is no reason to be surprised by white supremacy happening in 2014 anymore. It is cliche, Like, we could all see the playbook happening again and again. So Macklemore doesn't get to be surprised that he won a Grammy that he knows damn well he didn't deserve. And folks moving into the hood don't get to be surprised that they may be the first white person, but then, 5 years down the line, there is not a single person of color. Stop being surprised. It doesn't mean you have to feel guilty about it. And that was like a lot of the response that I got where people were really upset because they took it to mean that I was calling each and every one of them, complicit. And in a way they are. But it's not about them. And that's what it really is I'm trying to say. It's an institutional attack. And they are a pawn in that. So, get out of your head and figure out what you're going to do about it. But just like going in the cycle of guilt and, oh my God, and why you call me this, like, we got to move past that.
What has been the primary response, would you say, from white people on your article?
I mean, most of it I ignore because it's in the comment section. I don't read the comment section. So I get what the response that I usually see is on Twitter, and it's been extremely positive. Not from a lot of white folks, but from people of color, it's been amazing. And then occasional white folks. No, I would say there's actually been quite a few white folks that have come on, that have found me on Twitter from the article. And I actually had a guy today who was like, it's so funny. He's for the past week, he's been tweeting me links without saying anything, just tweeting me links about New Jersey. And I haven't had time to actually read what they all say. But finally today he was like, I'm sorry I kept tweeting you links. I just thought that article was so amazing and it blew my mind, and I've been thinking about it ever since. And every time I find a link, I just send it to you. He's like, but I'm going to make this documentary about this, this idea of gentrification and, like, trying to think about it more critically. And so I just was really excited about it. And I thought that was really cool. And, I feel like that's the kind of response that we need, like people getting excited about what they can do and trying to think about it more critically. That's a beautiful thing. And then, I ignore the trolls. I laugh at them because they're hilarious. They get so upset. And I don't read a single one of their comments, but people always come to me and they're like, yo, your comment section is fucked up. On Facebook, I see it sometimes when someone recently posted it on Facebook, and so I got the replies in my email. People, like I said, they get in their feelings, and they're like, why are you calling me a racist? And I'm like, you didn't read the article. That's cool. But don't talk to me, If your reading comprehension skills are not there, then just don't talk to me. That's all.
This comment section is rough, but it's racist. So, that's where I think I get my, I get the best response from it, because then I get to learn the ideas and thoughts of white people, the people who are doing this.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, it's pretty rough. It's rather rough.
One more thing about that is that what I don't get is death and rape threats, and I'm glad about that. Obviously, I really don't want those, but the women of color that I follow on Twitter get that every day, and it's a very real gender dynamic that I don't get that people do not come to me with that kind of vileness. And the one time that it has been that bad was the first piece I ever put up on Salon, which is about feminism and supporting women of color. Excuse me. And everyone in the comment section, if you read the comment section on that article, everyone there calls me she the whole time. They assume that I'm a woman, and they assume that I'm a black woman. And they go to town, like, what is wrong with this bitch? Why is she this, that, and the other? Another angry black woman, all this stuff. They are vile. I mean, it is one of the most violent comment sections. And I think it's very telling that the one time that it gets that vile is the one time that I'm presumed to be a woman. Mind you, my name is on the article, and I have two male names, okay, Daniel and Jose. So it took a special leap for people to make that assumption. And, you know, it's a whole other conversation, but it's just related, because I think definitely as men we need to be very conscious of what we do and don't get, and what we do and don't have to put up with, and our privilege in that sense, because it's huge. It matters. It matters in the sense of what we decide to publish and how loud our voice is. All these truths are, you know, definitely part of the story.
How I found my voice as a feminist of color. That's Salon.com.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yes.
Also, I just wanted to say that I found it interesting that you were was the person who was posting things about New Jersey, were they about gentrification in New Jersey?
They were. What he's interested in is trying to think about if there are any places where they found a harmony between incoming people and old people. Yeah, exactly. So, you know.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm not one to dissuade him from that search. I think if you do that search and you have the right power analysis that you're working with, it could be a really interesting project. You know, I don't have the answer. I don't know how to stop gentrification. I don't know how to stop people from being displaced. You know, so if people want to look for it, I think they should.
Very interesting. I think that it has been said, certainly, that an issue with us solving this problem of white supremacy is searching for that non-racist white person, and having and focusing on that, and giving that space for that, not, you know, for that, and searching for, you know, oh, they're not racist, and trying to prove that. So I just think it's interesting that it's, you know, your article spawned the interest in finding harmony and finding a way of getting along. I just think that's very, very interesting.
That's a good comparison. Yes. That is funny.
And I also just think it's interesting. I am in New Jersey, and I am seeing some gentrification going around where in my area, which is predominantly black, and starts with those gated communities, and it just spreads.
Exactly.
You know, I found your anecdote that you gave about the you being a paramedic and you only seeing one incident of violence, of so-called black on white violence, or black or brown on white violence. In your 10 years as a paramedic. So I did some research myself in preparation for this program, and full disclosure, I live in Baltimore, Maryland. You know, very, very dangerous city.
It's a beautiful city.
And I went through the last. I'm sorry.
I said it's a beautiful city. I've lived there.
It is a beautiful city. But you know, I went through the last 100 murders. I combed through the statistics on the last 100 murders in Baltimore City. I think the population ratio in Baltimore, I think it's about 60% black, 30% white, and 10% Asian and Hispanic. But I went through these statistics, and what I found that was 96 of the murder victims were black, 3 were white, and 1 I think was Asian. So yeah, I just wanted to get you to kind of expand on your experiences as a paramedic, and how this whole myth of black on white violence is really just a myth.
Let me actually start by shouting out a book that's pretty relevant. I didn't mention it in the article, but it's a really interesting read. It's called My Traitor's Heart by a cat named Rian Malan. He's a white South Africaner who was a crime reporter, South African, who was a crime reporter who basically took it upon himself to go deeper than the basic headlines of a couple of the different murders that he had reported on. And in the course of that, kind of like has a mental breakdown in regards to his own white privilege and documents that in it's just like a devastating book. But it's one of the few books that you find that really gets into white privilege from a white person's perspective, being honest about it, and has this whole history of kind of each crime embedded in the narrative. It's a deep-ass book. So I would recommend that for anyone's reading list that's interested in the topic. But, yeah, I mean, as far as my career goes, it really was just that's what it was. You don't, as a paramedic, it's so rare that you find a white person in the hood and anywhere really who's had a crime committed against them by a person of color. That was the one, and I had a 10-year career. I think that's why it stuck with me. And a couple of years after that, I was called in to testify on a case, which thank God didn't happen a lot because I'm not the type to do that. But they wanted me to. It was a police brutality case, and it had happened like 5 years earlier. And they wanted me to, I think it was the defense that had me in there. It was someone was filing a suit against the police department, and the defense lawyers called me in, and they showed me a picture of the guy that had been abused by the cop, and they were like, "Do you remember this situation?" They showed me my ambulance report, and I laughed at them. I mean, I literally laughed at them because I saw so much, so often that situation where we get called to the precinct, and a prisoner would say that he had been abused by a cop, and it was a white cop and a black prisoner. I mean, it was more times than I could count on both my hands in the space of a year for sure. It just happened regularly. It was a regular-ass occurrence. And this guy, and this was 5 years later, this guy's talking about, do you remember this one? And I was like, absolutely not do I remember this one. Are you kidding me? And we don't put those numbers down. We're talking about white-on-black crime. But that is a real part of the story, too. White-on-black crime happens a lot. It happens by people who are in uniform. And we need to talk about that. That is still a crime. It's still an act of violence committed against another human being. Put those in the statistics so that we can have a real understanding of who's committing violence against who. That's a piece of this, too. So there's that. And then, like I said, there's just the utter lack of white people being under attack in any way, which is really contrary to the narrative, the dominant narrative. And that's really what I'm talking about in this piece, is that we have this narrative of violence, this very American narrative of violence, which basically involves the hood and these characters that are thugs, quote unquote, and people being unsafe, white people being unsafe and getting mugged and getting carjacked and getting murdered. I think of the movie Grand Canyon, which shows L.A. at a particular time, and a white guy driving through the hood, and his car gets jacked, and all this bullshit. Not that has never happened, because there'll always be people that say, well, that does happen. And it's not about that. It's about step back and understand that, have a little bit of institutional and historical analysis and try to see things for what's really going on and not just be, caught up in this singular moment, which has come to define, this moment which comes to define violence in America, because newspapers, especially the tabloids, will just love to anytime that happens, that's the story, that's the headline. Oh my God, a white person was attacked. White people are the safest people in the hood. They have a force field. The force field is institutional power because when something bad happens to them, there is a guarantee that it will be in the news, that the police will do everything they can. They will turn up the hood upside down to find out what happened. That's something that people here know. No one doesn't know that. No one who lives here doesn't know that because it's what happens again and again. That's the force field.
Absolutely, and I also would like to add that it's not only just just the fear of the repercussions, consequences of doing something to a white person. It's also the fact that we've been conditioned to love white people. White Jesus, things the media, things of that nature. Just the conditioning to be loyal to white people from white supremacy. And I think that is also another factor of, it's a white person. And, not only could you get in trouble, but also, you subliminally, subconsciously have to worship this person, whether you want to or not.
Exactly. And again, I think that's where there's this complicated layer to it of non-black people of color who will be perceived as less threatening in the white imagination. And that's where you get different stages of things. So I move into a neighborhood. The white imagination perceives me as a certain way who's not necessarily going to mug them, even though I might. Just kidding. And then that creates another level. So then it's like, well, this neighborhood is a notch safer on the imagination of that white supremacist world. So we could move in there now a little more cautiously, but a little more often. So then I become a piece of this machine by the nature of existing in a community of color, which is where I belong. But I'm still a part of that. And that's the complexity. That's how we all get, complicit and caught up, and it's a dangerous game.
Yep. That color gradient.
The color gradient and the class gradient.
Okay, absolutely. I was going to ask you, and if you're not comfortable with answering this question, that is fine. But
I'll let you know.
We had I'll give you the backstory first. We had an admitted racist on our program. I believe that was Thursday evening, Mr. Kyle Hunt. You could do a Google search on him and find him easily. Redhead white guy.
Okay.
He's been on interviews with Jesse Lee Peterson and such. He's an admitted racist, but he came on our program and claimed that I think 35,000 white women a year are raped by black men.
Go ahead.
I don't want to take one person's anecdotal evidence and I guess hold it up against statistics, even though I'm not sure where he got these statistics from. But have you treated any?
No,
okay,
I haven't. No, yeah. Let me just jump in because not only have I not treated that, but I'm wary of even repeating statistics with no kind of citation. I think this guy's on Twitter. I think he's tweeted me because I've heard that statistic, and there's a guy that just will. I blocked him right quick, but there's a guy that will just pop into your mentions and drop a GIF with that statistic on it, and then run away. It's like it's not true. That's my only comment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it's not true, and I'm sure
I know you do.
But I mean, I think a lot of times when people hear statistics, and like I said, I don't like to equate anecdotal evidence to statistics, but at the same time, I think you should be very suspicious of if a statistic doesn't approximate you or somebody else's or several other people that you know's anecdotal evidence. That should make you extremely suspicious.
Yes, that's real. I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb because it is hard. It is hard to balance those things. I'm not good with statistics. I don't do a lot of statistical research. Numbers don't speak to me, but other people they do speak to, and you have to find that balance for yourself. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Let's see. Vic, did you have anything before we transition? Seems like this interview is flying by.
I know. I'm just going through the comment section. It's just wild. Before we transition, could you give us some examples or some warning signs for people out there who don't know if they're being gentrified? What are some things to look out for if you're being gentrified and you're in a black neighborhood? What should you look out for?
Oh, I think people probably know better than I do, but you'll see the roads start to get better. I think that's one of the first things that happens because, like we've been talking about, there is an institutional analysis. So a lot of times the folks upstairs will know that it's going to happen before anybody else. So you're going to see construction on the roads. I mean, I could look out my window right now on Nostrand and see that there's road work going on. We're in the middle of it right here. But it's that, and there was one other I was going to say that just slipped my mind. You will see the roads get better. You will hear the names of the neighborhoods change. I mean, I think this is something pretty much people are up on. I know I'm not saying anything new, but if you go on Craigslist, there's I wish someone would make a graph someday about how the borders and the names of Brooklyn neighborhoods have changed in the past 15 years, because there's a lot of knowledge to be taken from that alone, in the sense of what people are calling what neighborhoods. So there was a period where Bed-Stuy was still considered too hood for, white people to move into, as far as, where it was quote unquote safe, and Bushwick too. So they were calling sections of Bushwick East Williamsburg, and they were like expanding Clinton Hill deep into Bed-Stuy, and Crown Heights was kind of like coming down lower, and all kinds of moves were being made, and that's how you see it. That's how it starts. They rename a neighborhood. So Bushwick Heights, they get real clever. And then there's the one level where that's like a warning sign. There's another level where it's like, damn, to what degree are American neighborhoods being changed at the whims of some asshole realtor on Craigslist, or some nice realtor on Craigslist? Not to disparage realtors, but is that who we want deciding what our neighborhoods are called and who lives in them? Because that's what it is right now. Those are the folks who are literally the gatekeepers to a neighborhood, is people who have a realty company and show prospective apartment renters around, and then make a decision about who's going to live there. That's who's deciding the makeup of our neighborhood. That's not democracy. That's not community. That's pure, capitalism. And I don't think that's. I think if people were to think of it that way, I don't think anyone would be like, yeah, I want a realtor to decide the makeup of my neighborhood and the name of it and everything else based on how they can make the most money. It just seems ludicrous. But that is what we're dealing with.
Yes. I just had to throw in there, or at least I had to ask, being from Brooklyn and everything. Spike Lee recently had a little bit of controversy about him coming out and just being real about gentrification in Brooklyn, and he certainly has a slew of backlash it's still going on today. There's still articles on Spike Lee today trashing him, going on him about his very, candid rant on it. Did you get a chance to hear it, and what are your thoughts on it?
I didn't hear it. I really should have, but I haven't actually taken the time to sit down and listen to it yet. I suspect it's very on point if he's getting backlash. The man generally knows what he's talking about. There's times when I don't always agree with everything he says, but I think around gentrification, if Spike Lee let loose on gentrification, I'm sure he made a lot of good points. I wouldn't doubt it at all. And the fact that there's backlash speaks to that.
I certainly agree, and he's definitely, talking about, Bushwick and the name changes and things of that nature, and the black folks having to be pushed out, and just the racism that goes in.
Yeah, it's real.
Absolutely. Before I went into my next question, I wanted to ask, because it looks like we have about 10 more minutes with you.
Sure.
Is it acceptable if we extend maybe 5 more minutes, so 11:15?
Fine. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, awesome. So do you have any people who again, another anecdote, but there was a Facebook conversation that me and Vickiss were involved in with a friend of ours from way back when. And it involved an article where these people in Portland, Oregon, were opposing gentrification, and it seemed like a lot of the commentary on the article suggested that these people were being racist. And I just wanted to know whether you had the people who oppose, the black people who oppose gentrification, were being quote unquote racist. So I just wanted to know if you had heard any of that type of rhetoric, and what you would generally say if somebody made that accusation.
You can't be a racist without institutional racial power. So no, they were not. It's just such a ridiculous conversation. Not that it's a good question. It's ridiculous that people still want to say that and pull that card. That's just such a Tea Party card to pull. And as soon as someone says that, I just cease to take them seriously, and I almost can't even continue to have a dialogue with them if they're gonna continue to have a conversation on that level, because that's not there's just no reality to that conversation. So why are we even, you know what I mean? Like that's why I like that you all started out with defining some terms, because if we can't agree on the basic terms, we probably don't even need to talk. We're not going to make any headway. We're just going to sit here and like scream at each other. So if people are out here calling black folks that are fighting gentrification racist, that's just not people that I'm going to build with ever. I just already know that. So, you know, they're wrong. And that's the thing. I'll just sound like an arrogant dickhead by being like, well, you're just wrong, because I'm not going to sit here and explain to them why they're wrong, because it's self-evident. And if they're not being completely delusional in a way that benefits them, then they will see that truth. And if they want to keep being delusional in a way that benefits them, they won't. But I can't make that choice for them. You know what I mean? So my general philosophy about having debates or talking about race is like not to drive myself insane going in circles around people that I know are not going to budge. You know, on the other hand, then you get accused of preaching to the choir, which is another phrase that I'm always very skeptical of, because that's when people feel like they're already at that place and they don't need to get any further. But we all have further to go. There's always room for a deeper analysis and a deeper understanding of power and oppression and empowerment. You know, that's not a learning curve or a conversation that ever ends. There's no moment in my life when I'm going to be like, well, I got it all figured out. You know, like, don't be talking to me about power. No, like, there's no such thing as preaching to the choir. We always have further to push ourselves, certainly when it comes to thinking about privilege. So, yeah, I really don't engage with people that call black people racist in some way.
Definitely. And I was also going to say, like, moreover, like, even throwing the false equivalencies aside, I don't know, it just seems a little ridiculous where you look at the results. People are basically equating it to black people moving in white neighborhoods. And I'm like, well, the result is completely different. Black people move into white people's neighborhood, and they go there, and then they just lay low. White people move into black people's neighborhoods in the cases of gentrification, and 3 years later, all the black people can't pay their property taxes and are somewhere else.
And that's why it's deeper than, because here's the pushback. They go, no, it's about class. First of all, those two things are not, I just lost the word. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So it's not like, no, it's race, no, it's class. Motherfucker, it's both. You can't have one without the other, first of all. So don't talk to me about it's not race, it's class, because that's more self-delusion as far as I'm concerned. Second of all, they're intertwined. Like I just said, they always go together. Class and race walk hand in hand, as does gender. You can't just like separate each one and be like, no, this is just this. Like, there's nothing in America that racism doesn't touch. So let's get that out of the way. Second of all, it is a different situation. It is still problematic, and it's still gentrification when you're talking about people of color with class privilege moving in. That's still something we have to talk about, but it is not on the same level or scale as when white folks do it. It's different. And that nuance needs to be clear in the conversation, because when you try to smudge it all together and be like, oh, it's all the same thing, rich people moving into poor neighborhoods, there's a lot of nuance that matters in that conversation. Culture matters, like the way that folks move in matters. And there's ways of doing it that haven't always been where the entire neighborhood gets destroyed. So the class conversation piece of it, it feels like a dodge, is basically what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to hear your view on it, because it became a big... I know you're not coming from that place. Yeah, because it was a big thing, like, on Facebook. Like, the comments that I told you about were actually from the article itself, but there was a huge Facebook argument around it. So I just wanted to get... And there were basically some non-white people who were defending the white people who were commenting on the article, and so.
Of course.
Well, there you go. Of course. Okay. So we have about 7 minutes. So I wanted to get to the article about publishing very quickly. Yeah. So I guess guess the first question I had this passage that you wrote in the article, and I just kind of wanted you to explain something. So this is about, I think, midway through the article, and it's talking about Christopher Myers in his article in the New York Times, where he says that Christopher Myers asked us uncomfortable questions about apartheid in children's literature, and the industry hid behind the market. The publishing industry, people often say, as if it's some gigantic revelation, needs to make money, and as such, it responds to the market. And people don't buy books about characters of color. I guess my question about this is that this is also a pattern I've seen with white people, where they will blame like this concept rather than blaming, I guess, people who are making racist decisions. And the market is one of them. The court system is another. And institutional racism, the institutions is another one. So I guess, could you just expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think the institution one is a little different, because we do need to be blaming institutions, but we need to realize that the institutions are problematic because they're full of problematic people. So it can't be used as a dodge, but when we're having the conversation correctly, it's not a dodge. It's like a very clear way to point out why things are the way they are. Institutions are full of not just people that are problematic, but people that are problematic and powerful and empowered by those institutions. So it's a cyclical kind of nature of power that's happening, and then spreading that problematicness everywhere. So that's what we're up against. I think it's different. It's a lot more helpful to talk about institutions than it is to talk about the market. The reason people say the market is because the market is really code for the masses. Because it's that, if you say the market, it appears to be an uncontrollable force. So you can step back and say, actually, the day the article came out, there was literally, but before it had dropped, there was literally a publishing professional on Twitter that someone RT'd onto my timeline literally saying, don't blame the publishers, blame the readers for not buying enough books of color. Now, listen, that's a perfect example. I thanked him for the perfection of that example, for framing the article just the way I needed it to be framed, because that's it right there. That's the perfect illustration of the dodge that it is to say, well, the market doesn't demand it, daga. Okay, now, yes, we have to talk about who's buying books. That does matter, but it can't be a dodge. It can't be the answer. When it becomes the answer, there is implicit racism in that, so the singularity of that answer. Of course we have to talk about who reads and why and who buys books. All that is part of the conversation. It becomes the whole conversation. And that's when folks are trying to basically, jump out of the way of the bullet being the accusation of the lack of diversity. So, I say it like that in the article because people say it like that in real life. They act like they're telling you this brand new piece of information, like just being the rock of truth in your whole flawed argument, like you didn't realize that the market was a factor. No, of course the market is a factor. And so is the industry, and so are the publishing houses, which make it their business to affect the market. That is what they do. That's their entire purpose, is to try to affect the market to buy their books. And they do it with the mechanism of advertising, of picking good books, of editorial decisions, of covers, of all these different things. That is exactly what the industry does. So the industry doesn't get to be like, oh, the market, and act like they have no say on it or they have zero influence on it. Absolutely not. That is a bold-faced lie. So let's talk about things for what they are, for what we all know they are, and then have the conversation. Because you can't be ducking around the market and all that bullshit. It's just a joke, really.
I mean, absolutely. And just the fact that these companies probably have entire departments, dedicated to studying non-white people's spending habits and how to get them to buy more books, even though they're not really willing to publish anymore. So we'll just get them to buy the 93 books out of 3,200 that we have. But we're really not interested in.
There's definitely a lot of research going on. I'm sure of that, and I think it's probably done not in the right way, because it's probably done with a lot of assumptions. And that's like I said, that's what we're up against. That's what we're trying to figure out. I've been really blessed in my past so far that I have found some amazing people within the publishing industry, within the bigger houses, that have cultivated my work and my voice. But what the point is that we can't rely on hopes and prayers for our stories to be told across the world. I'm not satisfied with that. That's my path, but that's why I framed the article with the conversation I was having with the girl that I mentor. Because I'm sitting here feeling like real fucking useless. When all I can tell her is, you got to find the right people. What the fuck kind of thing is that to say? You know what I mean? Like, what kind of advice is that really? And that's what we're reduced to when the industry is the way it is. All we can say is, I hope you find the right people. I'm on the level of getting your work out there. Of course, on the craft level, that's where the work is that we do. But I want to have a better answer than that. I hope you find the right people. I really want it to be that you tell your voice, tell your story in your voice the best way you know how, and the people out there will get it. And if you don't find one, that agent of color or that agent who is white but has an analysis and knows how to deal with clients of color, then there are another 200 of them for you to find. But that's not what it is right now. Right now, there's maybe 5 or 6 agents of color I can think of offhand, and that's overestimating. And then, everyone else is white. My agent's white, and he's fantastic, and he knows how to handle the system, and he knows how to have my back. I can't assume that everyone's like that, because that's not my experience of white America in general.
Okay, for sure. We're out of time, but I would definitely, before you go, I would love to have you back first, and then second, thank you so much for everything. And the topic about the publishing industry really hits home with me because my wife, she is attempting to get published herself, and that is something that she's went through. So.
All right. Well, I wish her the best.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for having me. GoStar.net.
Thank you.
Long Hidden comes out on May 9th. LongHidden.com is more information. There's a sign-up list. I also have a mailing list on GoStar.net. I think it's on the page with the blog on it. If you go to the blog page, you can sign up on my mailing list. And, my first novel drops in January, Half Resurrection Blues, and it's going to be badass.
Okay. Absolutely,
so
sir.
Much.
We will keep in touch.
Indeed.
Thank you.
All right. Peace.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Good night.
Good one.
Daniel Jose Older.
Mr. Older?
I mean, I didn't know because he said he was a non-white, non-black person. So I didn't know if there was an emphasis or accent on his name. And I saw the accent on the E in Jose. And that's why.
Using that logic.
So.
Hey, I understand. I was thinking the same thing. Definitely thought it was a
absolutely
very constructive guest. Definitely loved both of his articles and his insight on gentrification. It's definitely a topic to that we'll still be talking about. It's definitely we definitely have to have him back on again because I want him to see that with Spike Lee. Definitely Spike Lee was very honest about it, and I would love to get his viewpoint on that. And I also, before he went, I did want him to expound upon where he said that, saying that there's not enough, that people don't buy books about characters of color. Really, that's code for saying you people don't read. And I think that's,
yes.
I really think that's very true. And I think it's certainly something that I've seen because it's people don't, what people? So it's either saying you people don't read or you aren't people. Because if it says people don't buy books about characters of color, but that black people would, so but
not even just would, and that's the crazy part about it. Because again, I don't like relying on anecdotal evidence, but Everybody that I talked to has said that the biggest purchasers and consumers of books are Black females. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And if Black females are supposed to be having only children out of wedlock and they're the only person that can buy stuff in the house, wouldn't it be a reasonable assumption that Black women would be a huge consumer of children's books? Seems that way.
But D-Train, monkeys aren't supposed to read, so you know. That's how we're treated. That's how we're all treated.
Pretty much.
And but I certainly agree. Agree with that, and it's I see that as a pattern, not in just with literature and publishing, but just as it was said before, in many other facets of our society, of the system of white supremacy. I certainly see it firsthand. In the entertainment industry. I heard that someone's voiceover voice was too urban sounding, so that they would have to find someone who sounds less urban to market the a certain property better, and just things like that. And I just think that it's a it's a pattern. It's like I just certainly think it's a code. You people don't read. You people don't, watch, XYZ. And it's, again, white people telling us what we want and telling us, what we do.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was muted.
It's all good.
Yeah, I did think that was a good follow-up, an interesting follow-up to Mr. Hunt, who was alleging that Black people were just running amok and beating white people over the head. And we have somebody who's a paramedic who said, that said he's only treated one white person who received injuries from a non-white person.
I think that was, just very, very interesting, that, and in conjunction with the stand your ground. This person's been, people who are in car accidents, knocking on doors, getting gunned down, in a white neighborhood, and we were talking about, who's really safe in whose neighborhood. It's a lot of the times people are like, oh, you're in a hood, are you afraid? And like, yeah, but I just as afraid when when you're in a quote unquote white neighborhood, and I think that you have to be extra cautious about that, and it's just a lot of it is I see a lot of it as projection, just this violent narrative of being in an outsider neighborhood and being attacked. I think there's certainly cause for a heightened alarm and caution when certain areas, if you're a non-white person.
Yeah, I definitely see most of it is just projection. It's almost like if you want to see a mirror into the nature of the collective masses of white people, just look at what they say about Black people. You pretty much have an accurate picture of what they behave like.
This is true.
So it looks like we don't have any callers. And sorry for the short notice, everybody. Doing Black guy stuff, and I forgot to publish the show description.
It happens, but they'll catch it in the archives, and we will be back very soon, hopefully maybe again this week or certainly next week. Definitely, I was just mulling over Mr. Hunt's last interview, and I'm going to be doing the same for this one. But definitely was just re-listening to that, and just kept saying, it's Jews masquerading as white people, Jews masquerading as white people, and I also see it as white people masquerading as Jews, and I think that needs to be examined and thought about.
That, and the fact that if white people are so non-powerful, why would a group that you consider not white have to masquerade as white people to execute, to have some sort of authority? I think both of those viewpoints are food for thought.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, well, if you didn't have anything else, then I guess we can wrap up. There's 5 minutes left in the stream, but
I think at the moment we could wrap it up. I guess, did you have any closing thoughts on our guest? What do you think about the feminist thing? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think invariably you're going to get that. The whole, and there are some things that I agree with him on this, where you can't separate those type of things. But I mean, a lot of times when you're going to get the intersectionality type argument, when you have people. I don't even know what that word means. I just know that a lot of people throw it out there, and the ranking privileges or whatever. I mean, all of that stuff is very confusing to me. I just know that I've been severely mistreated every day. So, and there are probably people a lot worse off than me. So.
That intersectionality. Oh, yeah, you're gonna get that, and it's certainly confusing to me. And yeah, I think that just it can sometimes obscure the conversation, just like sometimes with what he said about classism and stuff. I think a lot of times when when white people get desperate with stuff, they'll throw certain things out there just to be, as a hurdle, so you can so they can as a buffer to distract you from the conversation at times. But certainly thought it was interesting that just the type of threats that he got, versus the people thinking that he was a black female. Definitely thought that was interesting. That with the rape threats and the death, the rape threats and the brutality threats were interesting. But I wonder what his the responses would be. If he was a black male, and it was and he had maybe some type of viewpoint of that, of that, where he wasn't just a quote unquote non-black, non-white person, where if he was just a black male, just to see what kind of if he wrote a very straightforward article as a black male, what would be the response for that? But I certainly think that which is very interesting, seeing the responses, and that him being a quote unquote non-black person, and seeing that not only being a non being under the assumption of being a black female, they get that kind of response, and certainly just speaks to how white people, white males and females, treat black females in the system of white supremacy.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the rape threats, like, Jesus, like, ugh. I don't know, man. That hit me hard. I mean, obviously, I'm not surprised, but I don't know.
Wasn't it? I forgot. It's really blank in my mind, but I believe that there was some Facebook. They were on the cows, actually. Facebook group. They were talking about natural hair and everything, and they were
natural hair. Yeah.
Yeah, they were getting these rape threats from white males, and that's that's their that's for, if it was a male, they probably they would just kill him, but for females, it's a particularized type of victimization, and it's part of the pathology of white supremacy. We were all all of us, sex slaves for, centuries, and we don't like to phrase it that way, but it was true, and it is true, and it's a part of our victimization and a part of white supremacy.
Yeah, unfortunate but true. But I mean, shit, it's just an article. I don't know, man.
And it wasn't even that rough, of an article. So racism, white supremacy,
just a savage nature of it all. And this is why obviously it needs to stop. I mean, it is, I don't know, it's just not the way to be. I mean that's savagery. I mean, there's no other way to put it.
Indeed.
All right. Well, we're about to get cut off. We are at 15 seconds left. So I guess I would like to wish all the listeners good night. Got any closing thoughts, Vic?
Great guest. Very constructive, and can't wait for the next broadcast, and certainly look out for gentrification.
All right. We don't have anything else. Everybody, have a good night. Take care of yourself, and always stay reckless.